Welcome to today's presentation, EDI Unmasked. My name is Paul Parisi. I'm a principal consultant with the ROI Healthcare Solutions team. I have over 4 years experience as a supply chain consultant and over 20 years experience within supply chain management as a whole. During the presentation today, I'll be utilizing the Infor Financials and Supply Chain system. But the concepts and overall processes that you see can be utilized within any system for EDI functionality. The presentation today is going to consist of 3 parts. First, being a background of EDI itself. Then we'll get into some system configuration. Finally, we'll discuss some of the processing screens themselves. So what is EDI? EDI stands for Electronic Data Interchange. And basically, this is the electronic transfer of information between the vendor and yourself and the vendor. EDI allows you to increase your data accuracy. You're taking away that human element of the transmission. So rather than sitting on the phone and talking to customer service on a vendor and supplying them information and risking that person mistyping or mishearing your information, you're sending that data through the web and giving that information directly to their system. This increases efficiency because there's no time wasted on the phone. It gets right into their system and vice versa. When you think about invoices, the time it takes to manually input an invoice versus being able to just automatically, electronically bring that invoice into the system and make it ready for processing. Not only that, by doing EDI, you're allowing yourself to review things ahead of time. So we think about a PO acknowledgement. You get those pricing discrepancies back order availability. You're able to investigate this prior to the process even beginning. You're not waiting for the packing slip to arrive to find out something's on back order. You're not waiting for the invoice to arrive in order to validate a pricing discrepancy. You're able to increase your efficiency through managing your time better by taking away some of those minor tasks and that sending information. All right, so let's talk about some EDI configuration. And configuration is always the first step to any process, so might as well start at the beginning. First big thing you need to think about is what choice to make. What EDI information do you actually want to transmit and receive from your vendors? First choice is an EDI 850. This is the purchase order transmission. This allows you to send that PO to the vendor with all that requested information detail. So you're sending the quantity, the part numbers, the unit of measure, and your pricing, all that line level detail of the purchase order electronically transmitted directly to the vendor. An EDI 855 is the purchase order acknowledgement. This is the information coming back to you from the vendor. They're going to acknowledge your order. They're going to tell you, hey, I confirm that this order, it's good to go. Or I'm going to tell you about back orders. Or I have a discrepancy on the unit of measure or the pricing. It can be as simple as, hey, you sent the price over as $5 for every each, but our system is showing that it's $10 per each. So you get this information directly back into your system. Next choice, an EDI 856. This is an advanced ship notice. Typically, this is one that you would do with your distributor, but can be utilized with other vendors as well. This allows you to electronically get the packing slip to say, this is what they're sending you electronically. So rather than having to input into the system that receipt, you can have the receipt brought into your system through an advanced ship notice. You have the EDI 810, which is your electronic invoice. Obviously, this is for payment purposes, so it gets the invoice directly into the system and available for matching. You also have the EDI 832. This is a pricing or a sales catalog. This allows you to electronically get from your vendor the vendor pricing. Instead of having to manually upload or create files, you can actually get their pricing from a vendor through an EDI 832. This allows you to quickly change your pricing, quickly increase contracts, all of those things electronically. So what setup is required in order to do EDI? Well, first you have to have a carrier set up. This is the entity or the exchange between your facility and the vendor. Typically, your carrier could be a value-add network such as GFX, Vizient, or you can even have a direct connection carrier with the vendor. So if you need to have something specific with a vendor, you can create that direct link right from your system to the vendor's system. Next, you have to have your trading partner. This is setting up the vendor within your system that you want to do electronic transactions with. Data substitution tables. This is going to translate your information on what you know information to be in your system to what the vendor knows that information to be. Biggest example of this is in your system, you have your company, your vendor number, and your ship to account or your ship to information. Well, that all corresponds to a single account number in the vendor system. So data substitutions allow you to translate your information to what the vendor knows, and for incoming files, what the vendor sends to what the system knows it has. You have your issue method. This is making sure that the issue method for your PO vendor is set to EDI so that you know how you want to transmit. And finally, you have your translation and triggers. This is going to be the Infor programs that actually translate that information using your data substitution, your trading partner information, sends it up as a EDI formatted file, and then the triggers will actually send that from the Infor system to your carrier. Now we've talked about the 5 components of the setup. Let's look a little bit more in depth to each one. So you have your EDI carrier. Again, this is where you set up your information related to your value-added network, your VAN, or direct vendor information. As you can see on the screen, typically this information includes your user and password, what the host is, what kind of method you are transmitting the information, whether using a standard FTP or an SFT, a secure FTP site, and where you're going to put those files and anything like that. So this is really setting up that information for where the files are going to go. Typically, you also have a test connection button that allows you to make sure that the information you've entered actually works. So now we have our trading partner. And again, the trading partner is set up for every vendor and for each individual process that you want to do with that vendor. So you'll have a trading partner set up with a specific vendor for an 850, a separate one if you're going to do 810s from them, and then a third trading partner if you're going to do the 856s, and so on. Again, this information really tells the system it's a trading partner and how you're going to look at the information going in and out. And what does that information need to look like? It's as simple as you're having your EDI number, what your trading partner ID is. So what is that ID that you're talking about for your trading partner? What's the direction you're talking about? Is this an outgoing, like an 850, or is it an incoming, like an 810 invoice? Obviously, you have to put in your process. What process do you want to use? And then what system is this coming from, or what module within the platform are you using? In this case, for the one on the screen, we're talking about the 850, so we're using a purchase order. Additionally, using the interchange, this is where you're putting that information on that the vendor provides, or your VAN provides you around this trading partner. So you'll get that specific information, that sender information, what the sender is called, what the receiver is called, okay? In the case of an 850, since it's a purchase order, you're the sender and the vendor is the receiver. So you're putting in those different information You're also able to put in your delimiters if there's any special characters that the vendor needs in order to delimitate between one data point and the next data point. And again, remember that this trading partner is set up for every vendor and every trading transaction set that you want to do. The third part of the setup is your EDI data substitution. And as I mentioned before, this is really where you're taking your data and saying what you know it within your system and within the Infor platform, what the data field is, and what does the partner value or the vendor's value mean, okay? Or vice versa, what you're telling it what to translate. I know it as company 110, but my vendor knows company 110 as AA. Again, think of your account numbers, what that information is, your ship to information, your vendor. If there's certain unit of measures that you need to translate, maybe in your system, you have cases CA, but the vendor's unit of measure is CS. Okay, rather than changing your system, you can use your data substitution to translate that information correctly so that the vendor understands what you're looking for. Data substitutions, additionally, are probably the one part of EDI that's always the most in flux. This is the one that you're constantly getting feedback from the vendors, feedback from individuals within your organization for modifications. As you add new vendors to your EDI, you're going to be creating more data substitution tables. So this is really the area of EDI that is monitored the most and has the most maintenance to it. And again, this is important to stay on top of. You want to make sure that as your buyers are getting feedback, as you're addressing EDI errors, you're addressing them so that in the future, the information flows smoothly and has more or less hands-on interaction. The purpose of EDI is really to be hands-off, to have this stuff seamlessly flow from system to system. And that's where this data substitution and this monitoring contributes. Next, we have our PO issue method. Again, you want to set this to EDI. This is really, the crux of how am I sending my PO? Once I decide to establish this vendor as an EDI vendor for my purchase orders, I need to make sure I go in here and tell the system that when I issue this PO, I need it to go out by EDI. Seems like a very simple step, but believe it or not, it's the one that is sometimes the most overlooked at the beginning because it's so simple. So you want to make sure that you're taking care of this piece during your configuration setup for each individual vendor. And finally, for configuration, you have your translation tables and your triggers. Again, your translation tables, inbound or outbound, those are going to translate the information into the appropriate format with the appropriate information. So using those data substitution tables and taking it and putting it into something that makes sense. And finally, your triggers are what's going to take that file and send it on its way. Or in the case of inbound, it's going to bring that file in and get it ready for processing. Typically, these are set up so that they're running in the background and on a set schedule, maybe every half hour, every hour, whatever your organization feels is necessary to send out RPOs or receive in information. And that frequency can be reviewed to say, I want to do it more frequent or less frequently. So now for some of the fun, exciting parts, actual processing within EDI. This is the crux. This is the day-to-day operation. What are we going to do? So for this, I'm actually going to temporarily go out of my presentation. I'm going to go into a test system so we can kind of walk through some of the screens and we can look at how the screens are set up and what information you can be provided. Again, Just a reminder, we're going to be looking at the Infor financials and supply management system. But again, most systems have very similar screens, very similar setup, and processing is very similar. So here I am in the Infor Cloud Suite financial system. I'm under the role of an EDI administrator, so I'm looking at all those EDI information. So first, obviously, we have some quick links, some basic information. We can see things like if there's anything currently processing. We have anything that came in with any errors. If there's files that are ready to translate, files ready to send out. That's a quick way to just review your EDI system. Have some more tabs here. You have your data exchange. This is going to tell you the information as stuff is sent in or out. It's going to tell you that information. What time was it sent? When was it sent? And the process. Were there any errors? Or if it processed successfully. From there, you can dive into those individual files. EDI work, very similar. Again, this is where you can go and you can look at data that's still pending, where you're looking for work lists. Partners gives you a list of all your trading partners and what transactions you're going to do with them. Our data substitution tables, again, once it's configured, you've got it in here to manage your maintenance. And then history. Any transactions that have occurred, you're able to go back and review your history in case you want to see something from a few days ago or are curious on what happened on a certain day. You're able to always go back to them. Next thing we're going to look at is really getting into those supply chain interfaces. So those EDI transaction-based screens. So first thing let's look at is our purchase order output, so our 850. All right, first thing you got in here, you've got your output. Again, this is going to give us a list of the information that was sent out through our purchase orders. Purchasing mass PO. This is the job that will actually send your POs out through EDI. Again, this is a job that can be set to on an auto schedule so that you can run it at set times. And then from my EDI administrator, I can actually review my purchase orders so that I can see what should have gone out. So PO acknowledgements. First screen, just like on our purchase order, is a list of our acknowledgements coming in and what information that they have. We have our actual process. This is going to run that information, meaning I've gotten a file in to the system, I've translated it, but I want to run it. I want to take that translated file of my acknowledgement, my 855, and I want to put it into my acknowledgement section. Add that information right to my purchase orders so that as a buyer, I can see it, I can review it, and I can work my work lists. And then we have our purchase order acknowledgement results. Are there any issues that come up, any errors? This is a screen that's really going to show you what has occurred, what has happened with the purchase order acknowledgements. The next is receiving or receipts. This is those advanced ship notices. So first we have our listing of the interface itself. So we have all the receipts that have come in and what we want to do with them. We've got our interface creation, just like our acknowledgement. This is the parameters that we're going to do when an 856 advanced ship notice comes into our system and has been translated. This is the parameters that we're going to use to run that file. One thing I want to point out is you can have these receipts come in as released receipts, or unreleased. So if I uncheck this box for release receipts, that advanced shipment notice is going to come into the system and is going to be set in an unreleased status in order for people to review. So that's one of those things as you're doing your advanced ship notice. These are the decisions you're going to want to make to decide exactly how do I need to process within my organization. And as always, this can be scheduled so you know at set times you're running your interface of your receipts. We have our receipt results. Again, this is going to tell us if there's any errors with a file, what time things were run, and that overall status of the 856s. We also have a maintenance screen. This is where you're able to review the PO receipts that come through and make adjustments as required, or complete any inspections that may have to be resolved in order to fully process those receipts. Again, these come in and then we can manage them within the system, causing that efficiency. We're making sure that we're just reviewing the data and we're managing the system as opposed to just worrying about hitting those keys and adding those receipts. After receipts, we have our invoices, our 810s. So if we look at our input screen, again, the input screens like our POs, acknowledgements, receipts, it's giving us our basic information of the stuff that's in the system waiting to be processed. Our creation file allows us to, again, create the parameters that we want to utilize on that 810 record that we've brought into our system. We've translated it using our data substitutions, and now we're able to say, this is how I want to do it. Okay, I want to add the invoice. Do I want to match the invoice? What rules do I want to set up? Do I want to do this for a specific vendor or all vendors? These are the parameters that you're setting to actually process those 810 values. We then have our results. Again, you're going to be able to see errors, what's in here, what needs to be resolved, to manage to. So these are screens, these are result screens, no matter what, are stuff that you're monitoring for going forward as you're doing your EDIs. Then obviously we have the interface maintenance screen for our invoices. This is where I can take and look at different interface results and maybe correct certain invoices to allow for them to match as I take care of errors that have come through. And finally, we have our ED 832, our contracting, our pricing. In here, we bring in our pricing itself. You've got your create your interface records. This is your process to actually bring that information to the system. You've already gotten your file. How do I want to process that? And again, here's where you can start to decide, how do I want to look at this information? Do I want to do updates for my contracts, or do I want to just create them? Do I want to auto update contracts, or do I want to have it sit in a queue to be reviewed by one of my contracting specialists? Again, these are all those individual processing decision points that as an organization you're making to say, this is in the best interest of my organization. Knowing how we work, this is how I want to do it. Maybe I want to process these directly, or you know what, I just want to bring them in so I can review them from a contracting standpoint. And again, all of these, whether you're talking your 850s, 855s, 856s, 810s, whatever the case may be, each one of these is an individual transaction that gives you more efficiency. So that gives you an idea of what the systems can do when processing EDI transactions. So now we've looked at some of the background for EDI, the configuration required to manage EDI transactions. We've looked at the system, how we process different things. This really, in summary, EDI is all about efficiency, accuracy, and automation. You're taking that procure-to-pay process and adding those efficiencies. So rather than having 10 people manually calling your POs out and having delays in getting the PO from a requisition to the vendor's hands, the system can do that work for you. And now your buyers are monitoring the system and looking for discrepancies. They're looking for ways to improve. Okay? It's about that procure-to-pay process, making it accurate, taking the human element of the data elements out of the equation and giving it that this is what the data is, and I just need an efficient way to get it from point A, meaning my system, to point B, the vendor system. So what do you do from here? You know, after looking at this stuff and looking at your EDI, and it really starts to be a discussion with management and your leaders. What is our feasibility to implement? How can we expand our EDI functionality? Maybe currently all we're doing is 850s, and we need to take advantage of 810s and get those matching pieces of it. Or do we have the opportunity with our distributor to maybe take and bring in an 856 advanced ship notice? Looking at all those different mannerisms and all the different types of transactions, or looking at the vendors you're currently using. Are you maximizing your EDI system? You know, are you only using it for a half a dozen vendors, or are you using it for 100 vendors? This is where you can start to gain that efficiency. Once you decide on your feasibility, create a plan. Look at the resources you have. Look at the time commitment that may be occurring due to this change, and where can we start to maximize our EDI, okay? Remember, it doesn't have to be a big drawn out plan. It can be smaller, looking at individual vendors, anything to take your EDI transformation from where it is today to what you want it to be in the future. And again, as always, call us, contact ROI for any assistance with your project planning, for implementation, or if you just have general questions about EDI or the other Infor solutions, ROI is here to help. I want to thank you all for taking time out of your busy schedules to look at EDI transactions and to unmask EDI from the unknown to the known. Thank you.